All right, welcome into another episode of the Fifth Parent Podcast. I don't know why I do like this weird radio voice. The intro, I feel like it'd be too jarring to do anything but I notice I do it all the time. That my intro is, hey, welcome into. It's like I'm talking to a child. But I have with me today, Drea Maxwell, who is currently a success coach with the Online Trainer Mentorship, which is a mentorship of hundreds of coaches around the world that I'm part of, owned by and John Goodman, who is one of the premier leaders in our industry, and Dre runs that. And so I've known Dre for about a year and a half plus now, and she's certainly a wealth of knowledge, as she has helped hundreds of fitness professionals like me grow their businesses and help more people. And so she understands the ins and outs of that. She's been behind the scenes for a lot of fitness businesses over the course of her career. And so excited to have her on to chat about all of this. One, like what kind of the labyrinth of information that you've gained over the years, but also just like some of the mindset stuff. What's so valuable about Dre that I think everybody who is part of the mentorship appreciates is Dre just does such a good side with the mindset side of things and kind of laying out, all right, how do we stick with this and what actually executes success? And there's so many parallels between business and a fitness life. So excited to have Dre on.
Thanks for having me. That was an awesome intro. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Got to hype you up because you do that for us all the time. And I think as soon as everybody else in the mentorship sees that you've been on my podcast, you're just going to get like inundated with requests, and you're going to have to say no to a bunch of people because everybody's like, oh, Dre does podcasts because you just love this environment. So I want to start with this because I think that this is because you kind of have a perspective that even people who are what would by general perspectives for business be considered wildly successful. Like there are some people in our mentorship who have just redonkulous businesses in terms of revenue and reach and growth and impact and all of these kinds of things. And yet in through all of that, it still can feel scattered. And for you to be able to kind of sift through that with just like kind of, this is the simplest thing that you need to do. Like, I think that's one of your gifts, is to be able to like see all of everything and then break it down into what is the next action step going forward to kind of navigate all of that. So as you think about whether we can talk business or whatever, but as you think just kind of broad spectrum, what is a way that you can, when life gets hectic, as it tends to do, particularly with kids and things like that, to kind of sift through all of the noise and be able to kind of pinpoint and have an action bias? Because I think that that's one of the things that you're really good at, is like, how do we have an action bias, but having that be effective, efficient, valuable action?
That's a great question. So I'm going to get super meta, and then I'll get more like, so a very long time ago, it was hard for me to like differentiate, like, what is the route, right? Like, what is the main path? What is the thing that we need to focus on? And I did what I think a lot of people do, where you search for the things, right? You search for things. And I met this monk. I know.
As every good story starts.
I know. It's so, but he was so great, because he said to me, he was like, okay, you're a tree. We're all trees, and we're in this forest. And the thing that you're doing right now is, the wind blows through the trees, and the leaves and the branches shake, and we focus on the leaves, and we focus on not dropping the leaves, and we focus on controlling the leaves. And he's like, and honestly, what you need to do is stop looking at that and come back to the trunk, because the trunk is never going to change. you are that drunk as you are as a core person. So you always have to sit and be still and come back to that. So yes, that was like very meta, but it
Hmm.
was like a really good explanation for me because it's true, there was always so many moving pieces. So how do I sit back? How do I come back into what is the most important thing?
Hmm.
And I think that's the thing that's become easy for me to see with people's businesses is like, okay, at the core of it, what do you want to happen, and what is the one thing that is actually going to make that happen? That becomes the number one thing that we're going to focus on. So it's always just about reeling us back into remembering what the absolute most important thing. What is our mission? What are we trying to accomplish here?
I love that. So let's expand on that a little bit because this was we just had our like annual planning meeting of all the coaches, and it was one of the things that I thought that you did that was really super helpful. And you say this all the time, but like you, a lot of us are solopreneurs or like people who run their businesses by themselves. And like I have Olivia who's listening to this. Shout out Olivia. Hi Olivia. But even like that, like a lot of it's just we're running the show, and it's easy when we get into planning to just be like, all right, just put numbers on it, like it's revenue, it's clients, it's whatever, as we're planning the business. And you say like we have to talk about the personal side of this as well because you are not your business. And think about the broader spectrum of like what do you want this to become for you? Because the easy answer with business or just with fitness with any is just more, right? It's just like, all right, I want to grow bigger, I want to have more revenue or whatever, but that might not necessarily lend itself to the life that you want to live. Like the answer might not necessarily be more based on the outcome you want. So as you think about, because I think this is maybe a way to we'll go there and we'll work backward. But as you think about setting goals and targets, how do you think about defining that in light of maybe not like it's not absolutes, right? Because the answer isn't always more weight loss, as an example.
Yeah, it's I think the really, like, from my perspective, the really important piece is like, how do you want it to feel? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the biggest thing is that the one thing that we all have in common is that we were unhappy in the places that we were working before, working for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for whatever reason, whether you were overworked or you couldn't be with your family or you didn't like align with their morals or lack thereof in that business, and we wanted to do our own things to feel a certain way. And I think that's the thing to make sure that you don't lose sight of is how do you want this to feel? Because if it starts to not feel good, if it starts to feel um, like not worth it and resentful and too overwhelming and takes you away from the things that you originally did this for,
Mm-hmm.
then you may as well just go back to what you were doing before. We've lost sight of the whole original idea of you doing this and living the life that you want to live. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in building our life around our business because there is an element of, okay, I have to kind of go all in on this to kind of make it
Yeah,
work at a certain point. And it's taking that step back and being like, okay, how is it making me feel, and how do I go back to building the business around my life?
that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Like what does it look like to win, and like what would we want it to look like to win, right? Because there's like I think those are oftentimes different questions
Hmm.
of like how do I want it to feel or what do I want it to be like. It's this has to serve the life that I'm trying to live. So like from a fitness example, right, the easiest thing is like, okay, at some point maybe you don't necessarily want to be smaller or whatever, lose more weight. Maybe it's I want to feel stronger or more athletic or just have more energy to keep up with my kids or things like that. Like it doesn't have to look necessarily the same as it does for somebody else in a different season of life.
No, you want to feel proud of what you're doing. It doesn't matter if it's whether it's like the weight loss side or gaining
Yeah.
muscle or building a business. You want to feel proud of what you're doing. And if you get to that point where you're no longer proud of it, like you need to readjust like what you're doing and what your original reason was for even starting this.
Yeah. Then as we look at that goal, the working backward piece of it, because I heard, so you said monk. I heard this from a pastor friend of mine. So we're just going to go this way. And he's talking about a passage in scripture, which is Jesus says, I am the true vine and you are the branches. And this is the whole thing. And the whole passage about fruit and root, basically, like the fruit versus the root. And he
Yeah.
said, we're a fruit driven people, meaning an outcome driven people. We're not a root driven people, which is process driven. And that's the whole thing. Like, that context is through, like, all right, living a Christian life, like we're focused on outcomes when the outcomes are really, and so going back to the leaves and the trunks, it's the same concept, but we see the leaves. We don't, like, if you look at a forest from a drone, from 30,000 feet, you see the leaves, you don't see the trunks.
Mhm.
So when we think about the goal, right, that's what we're building toward. That's what the trunk is there to produce, is the fruit, is the leaves, is the whatever. But we got to work backward from the end goal to some degree to be like, all right, I want an apple tree. I cannot get an apple tree by planting an orange tree. So how do I align what I'm focusing on, the trunk, the root, all of that, with the end goal? Like, how do I know that the one thing that I'm doing is going to end up producing the thing that I want on the other side of it, how I want it to feel?
Yeah, it's what's the question here? That's like hard because it's like, no, no, because I think, okay, so the number one thing I always ask people when they're like, what do I do? This is what I want to do. What do I do? And the number one thing I always ask people is, why the hell are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
That's always the thing that I ask them, because I think that takes you from the perspective of being the drone and looking down on the leaves, and it pulls you down to being like on the ground and like
Mm-hmm.
actually looking like through the trees, right? And that's the thing of like, if you know why you're doing this and you know where you're going, it's so much easier to actually not only see the path, but see where the obstacles are so that you can easily step around them, step over them, work through them, because you still know why you're doing this and exactly where you're going.
Yeah. So the cliche phrase of start with why, but it actually has, it's so significant to understand the why piece of it, because again, if you at some point it becomes difficult, we have
Yeah.
to figure out, like, what are we going to do. So I want, maybe let's talk about that piece of it, because it's something that we chatted about beforehand. So you are kind of solo parenting, or I forget which way, how you distinguished it. I forget the distinguishing factor. But you have kids and doing it and business and all of these things. And we talked about, like, all right, why do I do this? And I think that for both of us, it's a lot of times been like, I do this and I do this the way that I do this for the sake of being able to have the flexibility and the bandwidth to be present with my kids. And so as you think about the why that kind of has been a driver for you in parenthood and things like that, how has that shifted throughout your career? Because obviously that has, in it's also affected what your roles have been. Like, even within OTM, in the time that I've been there, your role has shifted. How is that? Because I think that helps drive the train a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, solo parent home, because I'm quite lucky. Like, I have the kids' dad and I are like definitely partners. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're haven't lived together in a very long time. So I've been a solo parent home for like 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
But lots of support, right? And but the kids for sure, not only like, so it's difficult because when I my why, my first why, like in actual business, when me really figuring out what I really wanted to focus on and why I wanted to focus on the personal trainers, um and I've done a lot of work with physical therapists, but it always comes back to the same thing of like, I wanted to work with those people because those people care so much about the health and the livelihood of other people, and they really talk a lot about preventative medicine, and that so many things that people struggle with, even if it's like, mental health things, physical ailments, all of these types of things, it all can come back to moving your body and feeling good and eating good. And I just thought that was such an impactful thing that by me helping one of you guys, it helps it helps countless people, because even if we just look at one of your clients, it affects their whole family, which affects their community.
Mm-hmm.
It just continues, right? It's Xander Fryer said this a long time of working with change makers, and I very much feel like that's exactly what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with the kids side of it, it's there's a lot of layers to that of me doing this because I want my kids to see what I'm doing and be proud of what I'm doing, but
Mm-hmm.
also see my kids see that you can do this, you can be successful, you can kick ass, and you can still have all of the dedication to your family and the time with your kids as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you can still be successful in a big way, not just monetary wise, but impact and fulfillment wise,
Mm-hmm.
and still not sacrifice any part of your life doing it, and that it can be fun. Like, I don't think that work of any kind, if it's not fun, like I don't really want to do it, to be honest. So,
100%. Well, I think that there's so much there, but as you think about, let's start with the first part with the change makers and the impact, because I think this is maybe an interesting thing for us to think through, which is I don't know if we often recognize the trickle effect of things, um, and we can oftentimes wish away is not maybe the right word, but like think about the road not traveled. Like where would it be if it wasn't, if I didn't do XYZ? So like one of the things that I think about sometimes, just a story, is I got into training not later, but like I was in my mid 20s. I taught for 5 years, and there's moments where I'm like, man, like where would I be if I had started right out of college and got my degree in kinesiology, because I did a minor in kinesiology in college. It was like I could have just, and I liked it. I could have just kept going. Like it was a clear. Um, but then I think about like, well, I met my wife in an education class. I, like all of this would probably not exist, or even you take it one step further. What if I had still done education but decided to go that direction? I don't know if I'd be as good a coach as I am if I didn't have teaching first. Like, I think so some of it kind of informs as we experience different things, it kind of helps inform the direction we're going, and the trickle effect of then if I do this, what is then the impact on other things? And so as you think about kind of the paths that you've navigated to get to this point, because you've done quite a bit of different things, and how has that brought you to this point? Because we can oftentimes think of like, well, I really love what I'm doing now. What if I had found it sooner? But maybe how has that kind of informed the path to get you to where you are right now?
that's such a butterfly effect question, of like, but no, truly, because you're right. Like, if I had, as hard as things were, like definitely there were moments where stuff was like extremely hard,
Hmm.
and um, I wouldn't change what I did, because I absolutely wouldn't be. I wouldn't be as good as I am at what I do. I
Hmm.
wouldn't be the kind of parent that I am, and that I always would have wanted to be, right? Um, so definitely, like, so I started once upon a time ago. I always managed teams, actually. The
Hmm.
first time I managed a team, I was like 13, working in a pizza store. I know, isn't it stupid? Isn't it crazy? Um, it's like the Chronicles of Drea, like crazy, all the
Yeah,
stuff.
I
But I've
know.
always managed. I know, always managed, and went to university and hated university, and had to look for what I was. And I was always good at business, and I was always good at sales, and I was always good at those things. But I was very much convinced of like, you have to sell your soul to be good at those things. So I really worked against it for a long time,
Hmm.
but finally I got into retail and commission sales and high end sales, and then into corporate business, and traveling to stores to make them profitable, and really learned there. Well, messed up a lot. I made a lot of mistakes. That's like the big thing. Made a lot
Hmm.
of mistakes, and that's what made the learning curve so big. And but yeah, I got to see the way that teams worked and the way that one function affects so many other things. And it became very easy for me to picture a business now of like, okay, this is the issue or this is the goal. I know how to work backwards like this. This is the thing that we need to focus on. We need to fix this because where your bottleneck shows up isn't where it starts. You always have to work backwards, whether
Hmm.
it's the goal or it's the issue, it's the problem. And I really saw that working in between the stores and coaching, training, developing, working with teams and community and people. And if I hadn't have done all of those things, definitely would not be at the level of coaching that I am now.
Yeah, I think we can kick ourselves for mistakes, or struggles. As a parenting example, like, just last night, this is just a dumb story, but it was a moment where, like, my son was telling me was gonna, like, I'm gonna tell you a story, but, like, he'll be like, I'm gonna tell you a story, and he'll be like, I'm gonna tell you a story, and he'll say it like 17 times
Oh yeah.
until he actually does it, and then it's like 4 words. He's like, I'm gonna tell you a story. There was a dinosaur. Wasn't that such a great story? But again, he's 3 and he's just like pumped about it. So he was doing that, and then, like, as he's like hyping himself up to tell the story, I got, like, my phone went off and I got a text from my mom, and it was like not a urgent text, but I just saw it. I looked down and I missed the 3-word story, and he's like, Daddy, wasn't that such a good story? And I was like, but I just missed it, and because it would be easy to be like, yeah, man, crushed it, good for you, like, nailed that story. But it was like, you kind of have to, like, wear the mistakes a little bit, and it's because all that told me was I have to go back to what I did before, which is like, I actually have to just put my phone elsewhere during that block of time, because I'm going to get distracted if it goes off. And nothing is urgent. Like, there's no urgent problems in health and fitness that I need to solve this minute. And so it's like, I'll just put it over there so that I can be present for these couple hours. So as we think about the mistakes sort of thing and how that informs, how do we, um, because obviously you learn from them and you get a better perspective on it. How do we, or how do you teach people to, like, I don't, yeah, not to be cliche about it, but, like, to learn from them, but in a way that's like, this is actually a productive piece of it in the ways that you've done it over the course of your career.
Well, it's mistakes, whether you make them in just in that example of parenting or in your business or whatever it might be. It's not actually what you do; it's how you deal with it afterwards. Like
Mm-hmm.
the problem isn't the problem; it's your attitude about the problem, right? So it's about looking at it and taking accountability of like, okay, well, yeah, I may definitely made a mistake here. Now, how do I want to carry myself afterwards? Like, am I is the right move to apologize and to apologize for the right reasons,
Mm-hmm.
not because you're looking for forgiveness, but because you messed up and you want to recognize that and you feel truly sorry. Is it that you need to change something? Do you need to edit things? Do you need to reach out to somebody else for help with it? So it's just about accepting of like, okay, I made a mistake and here's realistically the best way to be honest about it and to deal with it afterwards.
That was a bar. The problem isn't the problem. um, but the idea of, it's not that we never make a mistake, right? The indication of success. So now going global in terms of success, because I think that this is something that you're really good at. Successful people are not the people who never make a mistake, and it's not a mark that they make fewer mistakes. It's the tail on those mistakes. So, like, how quickly can you turn around from that and start pivoting in the right direction? Like, the rumble strips on the, edge of the highway. Do they have those in Canada? I don't know. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
it's like I don't know if you guys have these things in Canada. It was like, I got up there with, for a conference, and I was like, this is like a different, everything was in French too, and I was like, what are we talking about here? Like, how many people in here need the French on the airplane? It was just absurd. Anyway, that was my Canadian ramble. But you go off and you hit the rumble strips and then you get back on, right? Versus if you're just like, I'm going to go all the way off. I'm through the, now I'm off the rails here. If you can correct back, then it makes it a little bit simpler, and that's more informing. So I feel like one of the things that you've done a lot of is like with businesses and things like that with us is like, all right, you got to do some stuff, collect data, and then figure out if it works. But a little bit of just like throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks to some degree. Like you don't want to be haphazard about it, but like intent, like go into it with the intention of like, I'm going to make a mistake here because it's going to inform where I go forward from here. Like I have to step out into discomfort.
You have to practice things. That's the thing. And like you have to practice making mistakes and failing too, right? And it's, you can't step onto the basketball court and be an NBA player. Those guys practiced for years. They practiced and they practiced and they practiced and they made mistakes and they got hurt and they just kept going. That's the thing. And you want to not overcorrect, because we've all like made that mistake of having that big reaction to the mistake too, because when you hit those rumble strips, you could overcorrect
Yeah.
and come back into the other lane and hit another car,
Yeah.
and instead it's like learning to practice being calm about it, learning to practice looking at it as it actually is, not as it feels, right? Because facts don't lie to us, data doesn't lie to us, but our feelings do, right? So that's why I like numbers. It's why I like data so much, because it is facts over feelings, and you can feel your feelings, but you can't let the feelings be the driver of everything that you do, especially when it comes to mistakes.
Yeah, we're gonna hang out here for a bit because this is because this is I think such the driver, because feelings are a very real thing, and the idea that we're going to ignore our feelings is foolish, right? You have to feel your feelings, but we can't let feelings determine what we do. Now they could be part of the equation, but I'll take weight loss as an example, right? I feel like I'm not making any progress. Okay, well, that might be true. That might not be true. But we can look at the data and we can say, all right, is this working? Is this not, based on what's happening, right? Results focus. But we can also look at what you've been doing and be like, all right, I feel like this isn't working. Well, is it not working, or are you not working it? That's a little bit of it. It's like, I feel like this isn't going to quite work for me. Well, it's like, have you done the thing? It's like if I came to you in my business and I'm like, Dre, like, I don't know, I feel like the system isn't for me. Like, and you're like, and you look at it and you're like, Jeff, you haven't done it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you haven't sent one message to one person in 3 weeks. Like, why are you surprised that your business isn't growing? Because you're not talking to anybody. Like, that would be the thing. If I had sent a gajillion and it wasn't working, then you can go backward and be like, all right, well, that should be working. Now let's look at the quality of what it is that you're doing. So as you think about like facts over feelings, because we don't want to become robotic. That's the nature to kind of do it. So how do we kind of feel our feelings and yet still navigate forward in spite of sometimes how we feel, I guess.
Well, to use the analogy of weight loss, like you don't just have one data point,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't just go by the number on the scale, because there's so many factors going on, right? Like you might be losing weight, but you might also be gaining muscle,
Mm-hmm.
and you might be eating differently, and you might be drinking more water, and the weight on the scale, like the number on the scale isn't necessarily going to be indicative of what's actually
Mm-hmm.
happening and whether it's working or not. That's why you look at other pieces of why you guys talk about progress pictures and measurements and energy and all of these other pieces. Like, can you do things that you couldn't do before? So that comes back to what is your definition of success?
Mm-hmm.
And then, are we looking at enough data points to determine whether you are actually on the right track, becoming successful, being successful, hitting the things? And if you're not, now we get to work backwards of looking at the individual data points. So with what you're saying of messaging, you know, it might not be the quality of the messages. It might just be that you're talking to the wrong people. It might be that you are talking to the right people and you are having great conversations, but you're not offering any calls.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at all of those pieces together. And that's what I mean by that's where the bottleneck is showing up. And now we're going to work backwards and find where it actually started.
Yeah. You have to do something long enough to be able to determine what, like, even if you don't feel like it's working, you have to do
Yeah.
it long enough to collect enough data to be like, did this work or didn't it? Because, and if it didn't, that's valuable information to be like, okay, that was. Now, I heard this the other day because this was an interesting thing, and I'm not like a big Jeff Bezos guy, but it like popped up on my thing. But he grew one of the biggest companies in the entire world, so he's got some good thoughts. Um, but he talked about, like, there are certain decisions that you make that are kind of like, these are hard decisions to walk back. So we want to be slower to take action in certain areas. And there's other decisions that we can make that it's, let's, now this is a trial. This is an experiment. Let's see how this goes. Like, for instance, with business, hiring somebody is a hard, it's not to say that you can't do it, but it's harder to unwind hiring somebody. Or versus a smaller decision is like, I'm going to change the font in my, graphics. I don't know. I can't think of something. Right. But like, not that would actually determine the direction. I'm going to send my messages at 5 a.m. instead of 8 p.m. Right. I'm going to try some different things. That's maybe a better example. How do we kind of go about figuring out maybe decisions that are because we can be slow to action, I think, because of our feelings and like, oh, I don't know about that, but we don't want to be too slow to actions. How do we go about kind of navigating things that we need to be slower with? And this could just in general, or it can even just be in business, versus things where it's like, all right, you gotta just jump and it's gonna be fine.
Hmm. That's a hard question. And that, like, I hate saying this, you have to feel it out, right? But
Mm-hmm.
with some of those things though, and when you said changing the font,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually something that people will hyper focus on for weeks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not joking.
I
And
know.
it's, you have to ask people. So some things, I consider some things a 30-second decision, and I consider some things a 30-day decision, right? And
Yeah.
and so with regards to hiring somebody, you've heard me say this, like, hire slow, fire fast. I didn't come
Mm-hmm.
up with that. I definitely have learned that over the years. That's a decision that's going to impact the trajectory of your business, right? Because that person, part of the business is now going to rely on that person. Therefore, you need to do your job of slowly hiring this person, training them properly. It's not something that we've all worked a job where we walked in and they threw us to the wolves and we had to
Mm-hmm.
figure it out. And then you trauma bonded with the people you were working with because it was so awful. But in your business, you don't,
I love
you
that
don't,
phrase.
you don't want that in when you're actually hiring somebody.
No.
You want to make them a stable foundation of the business, and that means building them bottom up instead of throwing them at the top and hoping that they don't slip on the sand, right? And when it comes to like those graphics, like, realistically, is your logo going to make or break this business? Like, it's not. So this is a 30-second decision where you outsource that and you move on to the things that are actually needle movers in your business. And the needle movers are your business are, your money making tasks, your longevity tasks, right? Of like actually building that proper foundation with systems and people and training and processes, and data points. And then there's the faster moving things, which are like the sales side of things and those other things. So you learn as you go, but you also have to be aware of, like, am I just afraid to pull the trigger on this thing, so I'm paying attention to this other thing that doesn't actually affect anything.
Yeah. The idea of I'm gonna postpone the needle movers for the kind of vanity type things. Did you ever watch the show How I Met Your Mother?
Yes.
So like when Ted is starting his own architecture firm and he like hasn't called a client yet, and he's like, once I figure out what pen's the official pen of the business and what trust exercises we're going to play on the corporate retreat, I am calling those clients. And it's like, okay, we're postponing the things that are going to actually move it for the things that make us feel like, again, going back to the feelings, feel like we're making progress, when in reality maybe aren't moving the needle all the way. So this is the lipstick on a pig, a band-aid on a gaping wound sort of a thing. And this can happen with businesses, can happen with anything. I feel like parenting, it's like, okay, we got to just figure out what are the needle movers. And so I think this comes back to the beginning conversation piece as well. So as we think about, all right, outcome focused, identifying the process of working backward is trying to figure out the mechanics of getting the result, and figuring out how do we work backward to those things. What are going to be the things that I need to do and try and collect data on and see if it produces the outcome. So let's take a business as an example. Let's say I'm starting a new business. I don't know. It's not a service oriented business. I'm going to start. Let me think of something that I would like to start. I would like to start a a shoe business. I don't know. I'm like a fancy, a nice shoe business. And so if I'm like, all right, I have this dream, I want to start this, right? Because this is where a lot of people start. It's like I have a vision for something,
Mm.
but I would like to start a shoe business. That's the outcome. How do I come back to, all right, what are the things working back, or what are the things that I need to do that are not, well, what colors are the shoes going to be? That might not be the first thing that I need to establish. So kind of figuring out maybe the process of figuring out the initial steps. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It's so like as you were talking, I was thinking like, it's fear versus comfort versus like external versus internal,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the thing of like people will focus on the things that are very comfortable
Mm-hmm.
and maybe not easy but comfortable, right?
Yeah. Known.
Um, the number one thing that I take away from people is no more Canva. You're not allowed to sit there and design anything anymore because that's uncomfortable and you're not talking to anybody and you're sitting here. But the things that are scary and uncomfortable are the then, not just sitting there and getting the plans ready for the shoes, but it's reaching out to retailers. So who are the people that are going to carry those shoes? And then who are the people that are going to distribute those shoes for you? And who are the people that are then going to help you market the shoes? So it's all about the community and connection and talking to people. And that's often the thing that people are so afraid of, because what are people going to think of me? Are people going to think
Mm-hmm.
it's stupid? Are people going to, and that's the fear base for almost everything comes down to fear, Jeff. Almost
Mm-hmm.
everything comes
Yeah.
down to fear, and trusting other people to do things for you that you ask them to do. Um, so you can't, like, none of these things, you can't really do any of these things alone. You really have to like reach out and ask people for things. And that's the thing that I think people are struggle with the most. Are this is just coming up, but I think the generation before us would always say, the hardest thing to say is I'm sorry. And our generation, the hardest thing to say is I need
I
help.
need help. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the part of it of like, okay, anything that just depends on me, I can comfortably do. But the second that they have to reach out and ask other people, whether it's if they need help or they want to work with you or they want to work for you, that's where people stop.
Why do you think that is? Because I have a theory, but I'd love to hear you. Why do you think that has shifted? Why do you think the fear is to say I need help?
I think that's a really like complicated question because I
Hmm.
think it's different for a lot of people, but I think it's because everything is on display,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
And everything is so public and it's so easy for so many people to see what you're doing and judging what you're doing and you know trying to I don't know stop what you're doing or whatever it might be. And there's that have you heard the crab story, the crab bucket story?
I feel like I have, but remind me because
Yeah,
I other people might not have. I feel like that sounds very familiar to me, but
yeah.
remind me.
Well, when fishermen, whatever, when
Yeah.
people go crab fishing, they just have like a bucket and they don't have a lid on it or anything. They don't have a cage. They just throw the crabs in the bucket because as crabs start to crawl out of the bucket, the other crabs will pull them back down in. And that happens in life too, as people are starting to do something different and something new and climbing out of that bucket that they've been in for so long and that they're comfortable in. People will try to pull them back down. And you can either go with it and feel terrible about it and fall back down and make mistakes and never try to climb back up, or you can just keep climbing out of the bucket and get to the bigger bucket and get to the bigger bucket. And the thing, like the big mindset shift on this for me was I went to a Tony Robbins event
Hmm.
and I saw Rachel Hollis speak. And beyond whatever personal feelings people have about Rachel Hollis, she spoke about this of like, you know, I was afraid to start my business because, you know, Melissa from school was going to be like, I knew it. I knew that you weren't going to do anything and making fun of you and saying all of these things. And she's like, listen, I'm going to run this race and I don't care if you all watch me fall down, by God you're going to watch me get back up. And that changed everything for me. Of fine, I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to fail and I'm going to cry about it and then they're all going to watch me get back up and keep going.
Yeah. The idea of being on display and a lot more of what we do being public, and whether I'm not going to sit here and blame social media, but there is a little bit of the high rate light reel sort of thing. And also, like, you look at somebody else, right, and their highlight reel of their life, and there's a lot of feelings that come up. And so, like, regardless of whatever is happening, right, even if you're happy for them, there's still, we're inherently selfish. And we look inward and we go, like, well, I'm not XYZ, or I'm not doing that or whatever. And so that's where they're the crabs. Like, I'm not gonna, like, if you go out, I can't make it out. So, like, come back in and maybe I can do it. Right. That pulling other people back down because I want to be comfortable with other people in this same place with me. And it does take, so I think there's two maybe directions that we can go here, but I think the idea of, like, the people that we surround ourselves with, I think oftentimes, whether in actual reality or the people that, like, the things that we consume, how have you seen in all of the teams that you've worked on, because you've managed and worked as part of a lot of teams, this crab story play out in different ways in the impact of maybe the perspectives of others, both good and bad?
That is such a great question about, and something so good to point out is like the people that you surround yourself with, right? Because it becomes like this echo chamber. And if your echo chamber is negative, if your echo chamber is pessimistic,
Mm.
um, of course you're going to feel that way. And I developed an audit system in my life for people and situations and jobs and clients and all these things of like, okay, how many times did this person or this thing or this place make me feel bad? And how
Mm-hmm.
many times did it make me feel good?
Yeah.
And any time they acquired more tallies for make me feel bad, they got cut out of my life. It got removed from the table because it wasn't worth being on the table anymore. And that happened with, I've worked, like you said, I've worked on a lot of teams and a lot of companies and a lot of places. And every time I left that place, it was because people's actions did not align with their words. People made me feel bad for learning and making mistakes versus encouraging me to be honest so that they could help me. And the reason why I've stayed working with John Goodman's team for so long, because gosh, I've been here since the end of 2019. I've been working for John Goodman.
Which was a
And
year ago, but it's also been 5 years.
I know, gosh, it's just, to actually say that, I can't even, gosh, I don't know, everything feels like yesterday. Um, but the reason why I stayed here for so long is because the team, they enjoy working together. They enjoy
Mm-hmm.
helping each other. They build each other up. They send each other messages of like, you're going to have a great day today. I know you have this call. You're going to crush it. As soon as you say, I'm struggling with this, the whole team jumps of like, how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't look the same today. You look, you don't have the same energy you normally have. What's going on? How can I help you? And being surrounded by a team like that is, none of us are crabs. We are all just continuously climbing the ladder, and we're pulling each other along as each other need to be helped and pulled along. And being surrounded by that, like, there's no way you can fail.
No.
There's no such thing as failure in a situation like that, and with a supportive network like that.
100%. The value of community, I think, cannot be overstated. Like, we hear that, like, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I actually don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that you're going to gravitate toward the extremes of that. Like, if you're going to go to the least common denominator of that. Now, if the least common denominator is a negative Nancy, right? That's where, like, you're going to become that, versus if you're surrounded by, like, if I was in a group of, I'll just shout out some great coaches here, but like, if I was on in a 5 coach chat with Mike Levine and Wes Hendricks and Adam Pullman, right? My business is going to friggin' grow, because those guys are just, they're the top. They're like, I'm the least common denominator there. Like, I got to rise to meet the rest of the group because they're there. And so the idea of, like, having people that build you up and aren't, because there's mistakes, right? When you work on a team, when you're, or in your community, when you're in relationships, like, there's mistakes, there's tension, there's all these things. But the idea of, like, focusing, being positive focused, being like, this wasn't great, how do we go forward, versus this wasn't great, you suck, is a totally different mindset. And I feel like I've seen that just from the outside looking in on some of the crews that have grown, but like, particularly you and Grazel and Ashley, right, and Madison, like, the 4 of you have, like, really, I feel like, developed and Amber. And I'm sure that there's other folks as part of that, but like, these are people who build you up, and in the midst of, like, just garbage, moments of feeling, can be like, listen, I can't walk today, guys, and I need you to lift me up here and to carry me a little bit. And there's something kind of pretty spectacular about having a community that can carry you when you can't carry yourself.
There's a couple things I want to say, but I got to backtrack because at the end of the day, I'm still a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I absolutely, putting you in a room with those other men, I
Yeah.
absolutely wouldn't say that you're the bottom that needs to pull up, because, like, look at, but relatively speaking of what you've done in your business with the time that you've had with being the primary caregiver is exceptional. So just so that we're aware, you are exceptional.
I
But
appreciate that. Well, can I, before you go there, because you were actually the first person to call me that, like, to use that phrase for it, and it was a total shift in my mindset. Because, again, my wife and I are incredible partners, and she's a phenomenal mom. Like, I tout, like, she's a superhero. My wife is, but she works more than I do, and so the nature of our life right now is I'm a little bit more around with the kids. It's just kind of the nature of the life. Now, there's times where the balance shifts a little bit the other way, but that was a total mindset shift for me. So I appreciate, like, that was a fairly defining moment for me. And again, an indication of what support looks like, to have somebody just be like, hey, like, let's just call this what it is. And that was a bit of a defining moment for me in my career to be like, oh, I'm not just like, oh, I'm kind of a stay-at-home dad a little bit, like default, things, but you're like, no, you're the primary caregiver. It was a weird shift for me.
It's interesting that you say the words too of like, your wife works more than you, because being a parent, being a
Mm-hmm.
primary caregiver, or just being a parent in general, whether you are the primary or not, that's a full-time job. It's a
Oh,
24/7 job.
mm,
It's a 2 a.m. job. It's a 4 o'clock in the afternoon job. It's a holiday job. It's a weekend job. It's a job, not a job that like is resentful in that way of like, oh, I never get time off, but it's
mm,
recognizing how much work that is,
mm,
as well as building and running a business and supporting people in the way that you do, is a lot of work, right? So just don't want to overlook that, but to put that of like, even your wife or this community, like community is my number one driver, my number one focus. And when i
mm,
when i came back to OTM as full time, i said I said to Jason, the program director, I said to Jason, uh, I'm going to build this community back to the way that it felt right when we first launched this community, because it was so tight knit and so open and so supportive and so amazing. And not that it wasn't like that when I came back, it was, but it wasn't so tight knit and close and being friends. Like, I just want everybody to be family and friends, because we are. Because when you're an entrepreneur, it can be so freaking lonely
yeah.
of like, people don't, I don't know if you can hear that. My dog is like very
I
loud behind.
can't, but it's. I was like, are you peeing? Like,
No, it's my
I mean, I know
dog.
we're going on a little bit, but
No, gosh. Okay.
that
But
was
yeah, no.
awesome.
Oh gosh.
I don't know if
But
that
yeah,
came across, but that was fantastic.
no, it's my dog. She has like a very fancy fountain. But the community aspect of it, like being an entrepreneur can be incredibly lonely. And
Yeah,
when you're in a community like this, you're no longer like suffering as an island. You're now part of a city, and city
yeah.
works together. There's infrastructure, and people are really good at certain things. And if you're a part of that community, oh my gosh, lean into that community.
Mm,
Like, be friends, connect with each other, get on calls with each other, share what's worked well for you, share what hasn't worked for you. Those things, and just seeing Grazel and Ashley and Madison and Amber and Lauren, just to
mm,
see them as they were, as like solopreneurs,
mm.
and then see them together in the community that they are now. Wow, do they like glow?
Yeah.
What a difference.
Well, and I think because I had Ashley on just last week. I have it'll be published by the time this one comes out, but her and I talked about the post that her and Grazel did together. That was from their boudoir shoots, and
Yeah.
I was like, and she would own it. Like, she's like, I would never have done that if Grazel didn't do it with me. But I would say that Grazel would probably feel a little bit the same way, where it's like, when you're part of a community, they're going to pull you to different heights and new levels, and do things that are uncomfortable, because you're stepping into a thing that's uncomfortable. And the idea of, again, this crab thing, and like the nature of what you want to do. So I'll bring it back to a weight loss journey, or whatever it is, a fitness journey, but anything is this case, right? Because I have plenty of clients who are like this, right? They step out, they try to do something new. They're trying to do something for themselves and whatever. And there's feelings of, from the people, like, hey, you're different, like, you're not doing some of the same things, and it makes other people uncomfortable to do that. I think for you to do that, and they see maybe what you're doing, and it's out of the norm, for what maybe they're used to. Or like, I'll tell a story. Like, I have had multiple people who kind of think that my career now is a little bit of a phase, which I've done now for 6 years, because it's like, it's cute. Like, you're training people. It's cute. It's a cute little thing. But like, at some point, you're going to grow up and get a real job. And there's some of that where you get a little bit of that, and it's hard if you're by yourself to like not listen to that feedback. because those are the crabs trying to pull you back in. And so as you think about finding community or building community, finding slash building, because both are true. Like you have to go to a place, but you also have to be part of it. What's maybe are some of the qualities of a community that is going to push you forward?
Oh, good question. I think like definitely like the willingness to be open
Mm-hmm.
and to not only to like give but to ask, because I think that's a big thing is that people are so good at being like people pleasers and just giving versus like asking as well, because what makes the community is both, because you think about how good it makes you feel to give, you have to give other people that opportunity, and it's not just sharing like the positive things but the negative things as well, because it's not fair if we all laughed together and we all had fun together and then you suffered alone, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not fair. If we're going to be part of this community, we're going to share all of it, and we're going to make time for each other and make it a priority. And Ashley said this to me actually last week, I think it was, of like she said in that group of women, right, that we
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, um, I'm not doing well. And Madison was like on her way to the gym and she's like, just a second, I'm turning around going home so we can get on Zoom together. And Ashley's like, what? And Madison's like, well, yeah, you said you need me. And it's
Mm-hmm.
that willingness of like, you need me and I'm going to be there, and I need you and I'm going to tell you that I need you. So it's got to be both, it's got to be reciprocal in all the ways.
It's the difference between a 2 a.m. friend and a 6 p.m. friend.
Yeah.
The friend who
Yeah.
you can call, like, I have a handful of people that I'm like, if I call them at 2 a.m., they're going to pick up their phone and they're going to say, what's going on? Where do I come?
Yeah.
And you have to have those people because those are the people that, again, going back to the fear thing, and it's like, kind of a little bit of the attention, like the fear of saying I need you is a hard thing, is because I think part of the reason that it's hard to say I need help is because everything's put on display as kind of picturesque. And so to go to a place where you're willing to be vulnerable and say, like, I need you, because that gives other people permission to come back the other way.
Yeah.
And but like kind of being okay with not being what your Instagram would say that you are, sort of thing. Um, and having people that know the crud a little bit is because those are going to be the people that when you're feeling a certain way, regardless of the realities, can kind of speak into that with a little bit of context versus just be like, well, just don't feel that way. Like, it's like when I tell my toddler to calm down when he's having a tantrum. I know he can't. It's like, it's not like, oh, he doesn't want to. It's like he physically cannot calm down right now. And so just telling somebody, it's like, oh, you're going to be fine. Like, that doesn't, like, you don't understand that, like, I don't know if I'm going to be fine right now. And I need some help, and finding those people. And I think that oftentimes, yeah, the willingness to step out and be vulnerable is underrated.
And to ask questions, and not taking things at face value, learning business, learning sales,
Mm-hmm.
okay, learning how to sit with somebody and ask questions made me such a better
Mm-hmm.
person. It made me a better parent, it made me a better friend, it made me a better coach. Just learning to sit and ask questions and recognize of like, that doesn't make sense, your energy isn't saying that, what's really going on. And learning that is like such a superpower to then building that community and making those friendships and those real connections of um, learning how to ask questions and not just I don't know, sit passively. in the community or in the friendship or in the relationship.
Ask questions and wait for the answer. Even you kind of
Yeah.
want and then follow up, because again we come back to we're fruit driven people, we're solution driven people. Like, oh, this you I asked a question, you say that you're struggling with something, well, here's the answer clearly. And that doesn't mean that you can't ever maybe offer help, but like understanding the sometimes the most valuable thing that we can do is just to ask questions, and people figure things out themselves. It's like the weird, like the therapist thing, like they just ask 6 questions and then at the end of it, oh, that was great. And you're like, well, sometimes it is just to like talk it out, and then you kind of discover the solution along the way. But having people where you feel safe to not have it all together as you're working through it um, is an important piece of the puzzle, potentially the most important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Waiting for the answer is like, are you having a conversation, asking questions, or are you just waiting for your turn to talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And uh, asking those questions. So we say this in sales, right? Of like, when you say it, it's a lie, and when they say it, it's true, right? It's truth. And
Mm-hmm.
it's why you always want to ask questions versus telling people things. Coaching is not telling people things. Coaching people is asking them the correct questions to lead them to the answer so that they say it out loud, which is what, I mean, that's what therapists are doing, right? That's why they ask you those hard questions, because that's the growth piece, is to make people reflect and actually say it out loud, because what makes sense in our head is doesn't make sense when we say it out loud, right?
No.
And that's getting people to say things out loud is important. um and that's where then the change happens, because they've said it out loud and they've truly realized it. So yeah, when you're having that conversation with people, if you ask a question, you're actually listening to the answer.
It's that facts over feelings thing again, right? When
Yeah.
you're talking, if somebody asks a good question and you just start talking and you're like, that there's no logic to that, but like you hear it when you say it, because you would hear it in anybody else, but like you haven't maybe allowed yourself to fully say like, man, I feel like I'm not making any progress here on my weight loss. I mean, my pants are fitting better, and I'm stronger, and I'm eating better, but I just don't know, like if it's working for me. And they're like, did you hear what you just said? Like,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh yeah, like the facts would not, the story I'm telling myself is not the reality that's happening. But I oftentimes we in our own heads we can go down a path that's like, oh, that's not really, like, and you even did it with what I said earlier, which was like, if I put you in a room with these guys, like, and I tell the story I'm telling myself is those guys are ahead of me, and in some ways they might be, but in other ways it's just we're playing a different game. And but sometimes it takes somebody being willing to be like, have you thought about it this way? That can sometimes shift your perspective a little bit on it.
Yeah, it's that just makes me think of Alanis Morissette, because she says like, "Who's no?" But it's
No, if we don't talk about Alanis Morissette, it's not a good podcast.
well, she says, "Who has been crueler to me than myself?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's the piece of enemy comes back to community and whatever, and getting a coach or getting help, is that it's very easy to be our own worst critics and
Mm-hmm.
our own cruel to ourselves. Um, but for other people to then hear that and point it out, like, that's the mindset shift, right? That's why you can't be successful in a big way alone, and in whatever capacity that means that success is for you. You can't do it alone, and that's exactly why.
100%. 100%. I feel like that is a great place to finish today. So want to appreciate everybody for listening. And I also want to point you to, I've never done this before, but I want to point you to, because we just spent the back half of this talking about support and community, and did another episode about support and what does that look like. Episode 28. I've never done this, but I heard Goodman do it on his podcast. He always like points people to another episode. So if you've listened all the way through, that was a good one. Because again, I think that the value of community here is, I wouldn't be in the business that, the difference between me in my career, or I think, Dre or anybody in their career, but certainly for me, that OTM has made in just the community that's been built, or by going to some of these events and meeting people, like the difference this year, and just having some like other people to like go through it with and be like, hey man, are you experiencing this too? And they're like, yep, that's not going great. Like that was, or like to celebrate with you as well is super duper valuable. But Dre, I really appreciate you coming on. Appreciate all your perspective. If you, I don't know if you have a desire for people to find you on the internet or not, but relatively private purpose. But if you wanted to, maybe tell people where they can, a way to connect with you if they wanted to chat a little bit more, or a place to follow up.
Yeah, of course. Like, well, thanks for having me and featuring my dog as well. That was an exciting point to the conversation. But yeah, I mean, online trainer mentorship, there is, you can find us on Instagram, online trainer mentorship. And obviously myself, I am on Instagram just as a personal human, but lots of people reach out to me, and I always really appreciate when people reach out. So it's just Drea Maxwell on Instagram. That's it.
Yeah, and I'll link both of those in the show notes. But yeah, I mean, if you're a coach listening to this, I mean, good for you. But like, be worth doing it. But I would just encourage everybody. Like, this is going to sound the worst. I can't believe I'm going to say it, but like, find your tribe here a little bit. Like, find people who are like, it just felt weird, but it's a real thing. Like, people who are going the same places that you are, and are willing to be vulnerable with you as you go through it, because fear and feelings can drive a lot of it, but having a community helps you kind of have a little bit more perspective on it. But appreciate Dre coming on, appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see you next time.